Oh, Yomalies, welcome to the Naked Mennonite, the podcast for, all of Menno Simons' black sheep. I, of course, am your host, Stephen Harder, and I started a conversation last week with Mr. Paul Reimer from the Steinbach area, and I've got him on the party line here now, and I just was really eager to dive back into the conversation we were having. We were talking about his history, as a missionary kid on the mission field, and just the unique circumstances that you were raised in, and the impact that it had on the rest of your life here. Can you fill in for me, like what? Because I'm hearing you say that church, it wasn't a safe place for you. Was there an element of like trying to make it work when you were in it, or was it always, no, this is all completely fictitious, this is all a front, and I know that, and it's just what it is?
I lived the way many young people do, by not questioning enough. And those young people who do question and who are always questioning, wow, keep doing that. Just don't follow blindly. Make your own decisions about things. I think I tried really hard to fit in, because that was one of the difficulties, was not fitting in. I'm, as a third culture kid, you don't know where home is. You don't know who your people is. You don't know who your tribe is. You don't know anything about where you belong. And because you're always the outsider who's from somewhere else and who doesn't really get it, our aim is desperately to be loved and accepted, have our parents notice us, notice that we're worth something, we're worth paying attention to, we're worth being devoted to. So I think I tried really hard for a good chunk of my first 20 years to fit in, to be a leader in the church, in Sunday school, in youth. And every time I was in one of those places or organizations, or going to the Bible school to coach, and then deciding to take some courses, and I just kept walking away from those experiences and thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? Why am I here? I don't believe this stuff, and I can't be argued into this. In fact, I'm going to argue against all of this stuff. But being raised a pacifist Mennonite, hardcore EMC, I had no idea how to fight something. I had no idea how to disagree with something. And I was taught to respect elders, and respect God, and respect the church, and respect. So I just had to keep my mouth shut as well. And the other fear I was always dealing with was, what if they find out about my past? Then what? And so I can imagine anybody who, like they say, people like me don't have friends. People who have been abused often don't know how to have friends, especially if you, in addition, been someone who moves all the time. And so after 13 schools, by the time I got to grade 12, many countries and all over the place, I didn't know where I belonged. I really didn't know where home was, except in sports and eventually school. But I think it's maybe why I was driven to teach and want to teach and coach and do things like that, because all of those fears and failures and disappointments that I had from my childhood, I wanted to do better for the next generation, for someone else. And if there was someone out there who had been abused, or who was being beaten, or who was being coerced into stuff, I could be there to champion them and to be an ally and to be a support, but not with an agenda, not with the church's strings attached or God's strings attached or whatever. And I just, because as soon as you do that, you're judging people. And the second you have all these strings that are attached, it's people who are already traumatized and really afraid. They don't go for strings attached, and that's why they simply won't respond to people who they feel are judging them. So it's tricky working with those of us who've been abused, because in some ways we might look successful in certain areas, but we're total failures in others, in other areas. And when we get vulnerable, which is what I'm doing, we expose the fact that we're incredibly weak. And even though I feel at times, or I'm told by people, no, look at you, you're really strong. You've stayed alive through all of this. And I haven't gone into like the dark, bad stuff. But as a like people sometimes say, how did you end up not drinking your face off or taking drugs till you died or something like that to cope with your anger and your fear and your pain? And maybe it was because I didn't have those role models in my upbringing. We didn't have alcohol in the home. We didn't have drugs in the home, like, or even a medicine cabinet full of all kinds of things. It's just, maybe there was Tylenol. I don't even know if it was invented. There were Tums, but I don't know if you can get addicted to them.
Can you overdose on Tums? That's what we need to find out here.
Yeah. So I can't even remember what you asked. Oh, did I try? Yes, I think I did try. And I tried and tried and tried. And when people died, or people got cancer, or people got beaten, or people got smashed out of their cars by some drunk driver, killed innocent people, holding my son, my second child, in my arms when he died, wondering what kind of a God of love gives parents a child and then has that kid die because of a disease or whatever. Like, when enough of those kinds of things happen, eventually so much weight builds up that just goes against every part of me that was trying to be positive, trying to say, no, this is the Lord's will. This is God's will that I've been messed up, that I've got kids who die, that I've been abused, that principals are trying to get me fired or are doing shit with me or those kinds of things, or the church is doing this or that. And eventually the last straw comes, and then I just say, that's it. So I would say twice or three times in my life, I've totally broken down and just lost faith and said, that's it, I'm done.
Decided to quit the game of hide and go seek. Someone else can go seek for God for a while.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, and you go wherever you want with this. Like, how old would your father have been when you came back to Canada when you were 10?
My dad was 50 or 51 when I was born, so he would have been early 60s when we moved back to Canada.
Interesting.
And by the time I got to high school, he would have been, mid 60s. Yeah. So when I was competing in events and my mom and dad were in the stands, kids used to ask, hey, whose grandparents came to watch? Those are my mom and dad, not my grandparents. I never met my grandparents. I have no idea what it's like to have grandparents. I am a grandfather now, and I love it. I love my grandsons, all of them. So my dad was my age when I was 10, the age that I am right now.
So if you could, travel back in time right now to when your dad was that age, what do you think you would say to him?
Wow. The biggest thing I wish for is that we could have had conversations, like actual conversations, not I'm going to tell you what to do, or I'm going to tell you what the Bible says, or I'm going to tell you what sin is. My whole life, and my brother's novel, which was recently published, which is his own spiritual journey explanation, was everything's a sin. And my brother claims he didn't have an actual conversation with dad until he was 14. And dad would have been, pushing late 60s at that time. And so I wish that if we could go back in time, I wish that I could have had honest conversations with my mom and dad about my doubts and my fears and about what was going on in my life and about the lack of rational imagination and results and thinking that makes up what we're doing here as missionaries or pastors or just evangelical Mennonite conference, and on and on and on. I wish we could have had more honest conversations, and I think, would that have saved me from my abuse? I don't know. I have no idea. But if we would have had a home where I could have spoken, where I wouldn't have been damned to hell because of what I was involved with, which makes me fear even more opening my mouth, I wish I could have lived without all those fears and without that. I mean, obviously, I wish I had not been introduced to sex at such a young age. I wish I could have had a more normal life, like other people. But what I did do, together with my wife at the time, is decide to give our children the best possible childhood of opportunities and honesty and discussion and talk. And I'll just say, even though I sometimes feel super negative about how I did, or I feel like a failure in many ways, if the proof is in the pudding, and I look at my kids' lives, they're normal human beings, but they're really doing well, and they're doing well in their own relationships and their own marriages with their own children, and I am so proud of them, and I know that they have had incredible journeys of their own, but I hope that the upbringing that they were given by my ex and myself has prepped them in ways that I was not prepped in my childhood. So, yeah, what would I say to Dad? You know what he said to me in his last year of life? When I tried to talk to him a little bit about my childhood and what was going on in my life, he just shook his head and he said, "You're far too sensitive. You feel too much." So, okay, then I can't talk here and I can't feel here, and I still can't be honest because it's not acceptable. So I would have been in my 30s at that time. So the message just kept being, don't feel, don't think, don't talk, don't be, just be rational. And yet, I don't know.
Like what? Like this isn't the first time I've heard that, and I struggle to understand. Like, is it a product of being a world that was victimized by world wars, or is it just evolutionary that used to be okay for men, and only in the past couple decades are we saying, oh wait, actually it's okay for men to feel things, or I need to do more cultural anthropology understanding to just wrap my head around that. Why that,
Ugh. Yeah, where does that idea come from?
Because it doesn't seem healthy, but
No.
But whatever. Neither did they used to think that wheat grain mutated into mice when you left it in a blanket. Like I didn't. That was the scientific understanding back in the day, if I remember my high school biology lessons.
Well, if you remember your high school English, you might remember that witches were burned and at the stake or hanged or tortured or pressed to death because they said they weren't a witch, which proved they were.
Too true.
So I don't know that religious institutions have a lot of logic to them. In fact, it's bizarre that they have so much emotion and illogic, and yet as a male, you're not supposed to feel stuff, and you're not supposed to allow emotions to be part of your thinking. And yet everything they do is so freaking emotional, often governed only by emotion, and not by any kind of rational thought. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, interesting. Hmm. So, and like, I just want to put a pin in, or throw a flag up here, that for me, sitting here on this side of the line, listening to your story there, when I thought about that question of what um, you would want to say with your father, I can't help but feel like, for me, if I was in that position, I would want, I would use that opportunity as a chance to express anger and frustration, and the fact that I don't know, is it that you're guarded, or is it because you're on the healing path of your journey, that isn't, the first thing that come to mind, to let him know how much that had, your upbringing had affected you. Are you still being, are you putting on a face here, or is it just really that doesn't necessarily resonate as true, or is that what?
I'm still learning. I'm still healing. I hope to continue learning and healing until the day I die. This is the first time I've gone through this. I don't remember if I was ever alive or in some other universe or anything else where I was also abused. Like, I have nothing to base my decisions or my life on because it's all new for me. And so by going on the advice of therapists, what I see is that I was raised with constant messages of sin, 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 temptation, temptation, sin, ugliness, and here's a list of them. This is how bad they are, and don't you ever open your mouth to an adult. Do not question God. Do not question the Bible. Do not question your elders, and things like that. No matter what you see or read, and these folks, in fact, thought that if you get an education, that's another way to get damned to hell, because then your pride will set in. So as opposed to maybe you'll get more in knowledge, maybe you'll work some more on your ability to be a good thinker.
Well, I hear too much knowledge just confuses you.
Of course. Yeah. Into
Makes you
realizing
really
what
hard
a
to
circus
control.
you've been raised in. Yeah. Okay. What was your question?
I was just commenting about. Oh yeah, like so, like just curious if you've healed beyond uh, anger, or what does what does that component look like? Like, are there people who would? Well, I guess you've already addressed the idea of people trying to minimize you and your story, your experience, as just being angry, or so maybe you didn't use those exact words. But I'm curious, like, where do you find that balance between, yes, I am angry and I have a right to be angry, but no, I am also more than that.
Well, when you're speaking to an EMC Mennonite, the teaching of pacifism is so strong, and it's a really certain kind of pacifism. You don't fight, you don't yell, you don't speak harsh words, you don't intimidate, you don't win.
Unless it's hockey.
But you do it as a God-loving, God-fearing, gentle person. And you don't question. Like, there are just all these don'ts. And so to be raised with that kind of intensity in the home of a minister and missionary, there's no outlet. Like, there's just no outlet. So I'm only learning how to do the things that other people in homes learn from the day they're born. How do you fight with someone? I had no idea. As an athlete, I knew you could punch people really hard, and I knew how to do that. Or I learned how to take people down. I learned how to fight physically. But one thing I found very quickly, because I didn't grow up skating, only learned that when we came back to Canada. And when we moved in high school, from my high school, we came to Steinbach. And so I started skating then. It turned out, I guess, because of my athleticism, I caught on pretty fast. And so I was very quickly moved on to teams where they wanted a big, strong, fast skater. And I found my anger was really, and hockey was like that. And it still is like that for some kids, where fighting, they say, is part of the game. Dirty hits are part of the game. That aggression is part of the game. And while I don't believe any of that for a second, I found myself very quickly becoming someone who looked for fights, who looked to hurt people. And that's why I stopped playing hockey after a couple of years, because I was turning into a really violent, angry person. And I had no idea where that was coming from. And when I think about my kids often referred to me as Mr. Road Justice or Road Rage, because they noticed a very quick turn to anger or a demanding of justice from their dad. They couldn't believe how, and I was always trying to get justice for the underdog or for the weak person or the person who was being abused or whatever. And so I understood after a while that I was filled with a lot of anger and a lot of rage. But here I've spent my whole life tamping it down and being the positive guy, and as a coach, keeping myself under control and trying to model exemplary behavior, solve your problems through turning your anger into better performance or better passes or harder shots or whatever it is. Don't get sidetracked by becoming violent or distracting yourself from being the best you can be through stupidity. So in that way, parts of me, I think, were learning how to be an adult and how to work through issues of anger and that kind of thing. But at the same time, I didn't know where that came from. Where does this anger come from? And do all people have the same amount? Because there are some people who don't seem to have much anger. And I think, wow, what's happened to you in your life that makes you so happy and peaceful? And then when I think people say, yeah, but you had this famous father who was a missionary and a pastor, and wasn't your family, you guys were all so successful and everything was so wonderful. Like, what have you got to complain about? And I'm thinking, holy smokes, you have no idea what went on in our family.
Well, and that's a big piece of it, is that front, right? Like, yeah, if you look successful, and then no one needs to ask any questions.
Mm-hmm. And we do each have our own story. in my family of 11 kids and mom and dad, I guess 2 moms and a dad, every single one of us has our own story. We have our own mythology. We've got our own version of what happened and why. And we have our own ways that we try to heal from it or run away from it or hide from it. And some of my siblings find their healing and their safety in church. Many don't, because it was too hateful a place for them, too scary a place, too judging a place, and they didn't feel listened to. They were always being told. And that's what has happened with me too when I've spoken to some siblings and a few other people, friends, where I start to share something and then they tell me, no, it's not like that, it's different. Okay, well, so I just wasted however much energy talking to you about this because you didn't even listen. You didn't even have the respect of me to say, oh, so that's how you feel. Wow. I'm sorry about that. Or what a journey, or so where are you off to next, or whatever. No, just I'm obviously wrong. And then, unfortunately, what happens is that message then goes right back to the part of my brain, which was so traumatized as a kid that it just functioned on reptilian mode for years and years and years, where I could not think. I mean, no wonder I was labeled retarded, because I couldn't think. I was under so much stress and so terrified that I just couldn't think. And as soon as tension ramped up, The only thing that came to me was what I guess reptiles do, which is run fast, or turtle. And so I became good at doing both of those. Just either not saying a thing and just not opening my mouth and not even knowing how to articulate something. And then the other possibility is run, which means stay busy.
Well, if there's, fight, flight, or freeze, and already fighting is off the table, then yeah, that just leaves you flight and freeze.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, I'm just and disclose whatever you want to here. I'm just curious what your relationship with your sibling. Obviously, there's a ton of them. What's your relationship with your siblings like? What kind of, if you're to categorize them into a couple of categories, what is it like? Because it seems like it's a big mismatch. It's an unconventional family.
Yeah, it's not all in the family, that's for sure. When I was a young kid, I thought we were one big happy family. I didn't even know that my dad had been married twice. I didn't know that all those older siblings who got married at the same time as my mom and dad were from a different mom. I had no idea about any of that. Nothing was ever said. And if it was, I sure didn't catch on to any of that. So my naivety in our family made me think we had a normal family for a long time. And then as I got older and learned more about our family and began to see patterns, and then heard some of my older siblings open their mouths about what they had gone through and were going through, and learned a little bit about their story, I began to then hear and see, including my mom, for example, when she was writing her stories, a kind of a memoir, which was just a book of stories, short vignettes from throughout time. It ended. She wrote and wrote and wrote, and it said, "Okay, finally you can print now and publish." And Mark, Cheryl, and I all noticed that her stories ended when she got married to my dad. So obviously, my first question is, why didn't you continue writing your stories? How could they end right there? And I didn't know until many, many years later that Mom's life became hell when she married my dad. It also eventually became really deep love and commitment. And my mom was committed to all of those kids. And she prayed for all of them and loved them all. But she was completely unprepared and out of her depth for how to deal with the pain that those kids were going through and the way the family was set up. My dad figured he didn't want to turn these kids against my mom because he was never around. So he asked the oldest sister, who was still at home, to become the disciplinarian, so that my mom wouldn't be hated. And what the effect was, that my mom became just a maid, just a servant who could be bossed around or pushed or yelled at or dismissed because she wasn't of any consequence. And so I think that psychologically, emotionally backfired, that whole strategy. I think the fact that my mom had kids in the end, that dad convinced her to have kids, probably was a really good thing, because we were all here for her in her old age, and the three of us. And while there were some visits from the older kids, one or two of them, many never, ever, ever came to see Mom, or maybe came once a year or something like that. And so they were wise for that part of it. But I think one of the things that I also found out was that my sister Cheryl, who, and I'm naming names here, she's one of the sisters, but she's never been included as one of the sisters. She wasn't even referred to as one of the sisters. When the sisters would get together, they didn't invite her. And that happened so many times, and she was so frustrated and felt so left out that she finally said, to heck with it. I'm not part of this family anymore. I have nothing to do with the older ones, and they don't include me, so I'm not part of this. And I think because of my abuse, I refused to ever commit. I refused to be vulnerable. I refused to actually put my commitment or potential rejection open to the family. So I just didn't commit, and I just stayed busy with sports, and often was gone for so many months at a time, or weeks at a time, or days at a time, for training, for traveling, for competing all over the place. I didn't have to worry about growing up with family, but I also then didn't get to know them, and didn't get to know cousins, and on and on and on. So it's a difficult admission, maybe. You know, when they talk about long distance truckers, kids grow up without a dad. He's just not there. And or as teachers, we notice that sometimes these kids that come from homes where there just is zero presence of a father or whoever, some of those kids struggle. They struggle with all kinds of things, and that's the baggage that they bring to school because of their home life. The baggage I brought to school was from my home life as well, and part of that home life was not feeling like I fit in. And I love my older siblings as much as I can, realizing that that's kind of a cliche statement. But I value them for all the different roles they have played in my life when I was a kid growing up. And I could name many, many things that, not all of them, because some of them just weren't around. They're too old. My oldest brother is 29 years older than Mark, 27 years, almost 27 years older than me. So we didn't know them. We would visit with them. Their kids were older than me. So I'm an uncle to people who are older than me. So you get families with such a massive, massive range from birth of first child to the last child. And that's the other thing, right? Families change and evolve as they go along, and so did ours. And so do I. So I hope that now that I've been in therapy for years, and I've worked through the suicidal parts, that can come back pretty swiftly. That some of those feelings of darkness and no hope and just terror, some of that can come back pretty quickly, and so I fall back on strategies that I've learned with therapists to try to just make it through the day, or make it through the night, or make it to the end of the week, and that kind of thing.
If you could, give yourself young Paul advice, someone who's who's struggling with this, the shame and the hurt, and the confusion and everything that was so heavy and so unwieldy for you to deal with as a youngster there, what kind of advice would you give yourself now?
Everybody should be in therapy.
If you have a brain, you should be in therapy.
Yep. If you're breathing, you should be in therapy. Get constant mental health checkups. Read. Find your community, whether you need lots of people. Self-understanding, self-forgiveness are huge. Forgiving oneself and then forgiving others. Just every day, forgive, forgive, forgive. Be really thankful all the time, and be really honest. And encourage, I would encourage myself to get help as soon as possible, and to find people to talk to as soon as possible and stop this nonsense of boys don't talk, men don't share. Sharing is weakness. Crying is weakness. Emotion is weakness. No, those are all healthiness. And they really are required to be a functioning, healthy human being.
Which do you think is harder, to be vulnerable or to put up walls?
Oh, being vulnerable is harder because if you're vulnerable and someone isn't listening, or someone is going to respond incorrectly, making you feel judged or making you feel further removed, that's such a big fear for those of us who are already treading so lightly that it's easier just to, I mean, the Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby, is all about that. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a priest who goes to the jar by the door and chooses the face to put on for whatever ritual or ceremony you're doing, or whether you're a parent or you're a student or you're a whatever. We do tend to choose more quickly to just put on whatever face needs to be put on. And so I feel like I've been given a second chance now, including in a relationship. And my partner and I, every Friday, although it might change now to Saturdays, but we get together and we do what's called highs and lows, or our Friday meeting. And our Friday meeting is talking about the things that we really loved and appreciated and what worked for us during the week, the things that made us angry or confused us or were low points, hurt us during the week. And then those are talking points. And then we work through all of that. So it's not just a list. This is now a time where we're discussing this. We're going to talk through this. And so that is something that I'm really thankful for. And it's a commitment that we have with one another so that we don't fall into what I do best, which is just hide everything. Or did best.
Interesting. Paul, this has been such a great conversation. So good to hear about your journey, where you've been, where you're going, and some of the fruit from these some of these hurdles that you've had to overcome. I think those are some powerful messages, and we're wise to try to learn from those things. So thank you so much for just taking the time to share that with the folks who are listening here. I really do value that.
You are very welcome. Mm-hmm. And nobody even interrupted during this party line conversation.
I know, right?
Which is amazing, because when I moved to Manitoba and worked for my auntie on the farm, she had a party line. There were always people on it.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe our conversation is just so interesting, they plumb forgot what it is that they needed the party line for.
All right.
Now, I think my hymn sing program is about to begin, but really appreciate your time here, and I hope that you get your wish of continued health and continued healing, and continued growth, because I think that's something that we can all aspire to. Now, it doesn't come easy, but I think it's worthwhile.
Thank you for the invitation to share.
It's my pleasure. So this is Stephen Harder signing off. If you need to connect with any other black sheep from Manos Flock, you can always find us on the Facebook group. And until next time, don't forget, underneath our Sunday best, we're all naked. We'll see you next time.